Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball. All-Star game is right around the corner. The finalists have been announced. We're into phase two, and Patrick and myself today are going to go through all of the latest with the voting. Who's the biggest snub off the top of your head? Who are you just irate about? Is there anybody that did not make the final? You said, wait, what happened there?
I am just shocked that we live in a world where more people aren't talking about Will Smith. I mean, the guy has been, since he came into the league, one of the best backstops, one of the best catchers on the best team, really, since he's come up in the Los Angeles Dodgers. And for Will Smith to not be a finalist, it's just weird. Seems weird.
You know what? That is definitely a big one that I noted as we were going through this. And I think the thing that showed up at the end of this voting is the Phillies started stuffing the ballot because you see Nick Castellanos making it across as a finalist. Brandon Marsh has been hurt a lot of this year. Trey Turner's a finalist. There's always a team, right? There's always a team that just gets the voter support. And it's usually the team that's maybe the best in baseball that has fans really dialed in. So no surprise that the Phillies had a bunch of guys that made it across. But man, the injured Phillies that are finalists, it kind of clears a lot of these position battles where we sort of hope that it's not a Philly that starts in a couple of these spots.
Yeah, Quentin Keene in our chat asking how many Brewers are all-stars. Well, Milwaukee did pretty well. Now, William Contreras did get in over Will Smith, so he deserves to be there. We all know that. Christian Yelich, one of the 6 finalists in the outfield. I think Joey Ortiz might have been one of those snubs there at third base. Alec Boehm, definitely one of the top vote getters, deserves to be a finalist. Manny Machado, on the other hand, I don't think so. That would have been nice to see Joey Ortiz crack through, but for a guy who's a rookie on a brand new team in a smaller market like Milwaukee, you understand that. But I think that wrong will be righted when we actually get to selection day for the All-Star game when it comes to Joey Ortiz being an All-Star this summer.
I think he will be too. And because we're touching on so many different National League guys, let's start in the NL and we'll go back around to the American League. And we'll open up right where we started there. Will Smith getting snubbed, the finalist at the catcher position. You got William Contreras and JT Realmuto. It makes the decision easy in my eyes, right? Contreras should be starting the All-Star game this year. Hopefully, Phillies fans don't edge that out because is Realmuto even back from his injury? I don't think he is. I guess that could open up a door for Will Smith to get in when you remove the fans in that sense. But to me, Contreras should be starting this game.
Yeah, it's a similar conversation to Mookie Betts versus Trey Turner, where, yes, we know that Mookie Betts will, by the time the All-Star game rolls around, will have missed a month. But you could still make the case that he is the better player. I don't think there's really any case to be made that JT Realmuto has been better this season for a guy going into the year as one of the favorites in William Contreras. He'll be a second-time All-Star game starter, but for the first time as a catcher. So he's absolutely deserving of that honors.
He is. And that allows us to move to first base, which has already been decided for us.
Has
Bryce
it?
Harper.
Has
Bryce
it?
Harper. But wait.
Has it?
Hold on. The starter originally has been decided for us. And then I honestly think that there is no debate beyond that, right? Because here's the thing. They said the earliest Harper would come back would be, I think it was the 9th, which would be before the All-Star break. So let's actually open up there. If you're the Phillies, Bryce Harper's been to enough All-Star games. Aren't you just saying, look, you had a hamstring injury. We got a huge cushion. Is there any reason for Bryce Harper to play in the game or to play in any game before the All-Star break? Because I don't think there is.
No. Will he want to be there? Maybe this actually opens the door for him participating in the home run derby, since he won't have to run. Maybe that will be less wear and tear on Bryce Harper. We thought we were going to get a pair of outfielders who are going to be selected to start the game as infielders in Mookie Betts and Bryce Harper. Now they're both a little bit banged up. So that will be interesting to see what Bryce Harper's decision will be. The thing that might be the most shocking of all is this is Bryce Harper's 6 seasons with the Phillies, which is kind of a surprise. It does feel maybe more like 4 seasons that he's been with the Phillies. But in his previous 5, has been an All-Star only once.
Wow.
Was the NL MVP there in, 2021?
Yeah, 21.
Wasn't an All-Star that year. He wasn't even an All-Star. So it was a one-time All-Star. This would be his first time as a first baseman, as a first base All-Star. So I think that is interesting. So yeah, we learned on the same day that Bryce Harper was selected as the starting first baseman, as the leading vote getter in the entire National League, and also that his ability to start that game was very much in jeopardy, pulling up with the little hamstring strain on Thursday night, which nobody wants to see.
No, not at all. It is kind of crazy to think that the voters haven't been there, but I guess if you think back to Phillies baseball prior to a couple years ago, maybe there just wasn't that same voter turnout that you're going to get when your team's struggling. And then since they've been good, he's been sort of hurt in both of those seasons, right? So I guess that could explain a little bit, but it is kind of crazy because you almost feel like Harper's there every year. Why wouldn't he be? So the fact that he hasn't been in that long, pretty nuts. So good that that'll be a wrong will be right there no matter what. He's going to have an all-star next to his box for 2024. Let's look here at second base here because I think actually, you know what? Let me close the book on first. If
Sure.
Freddie Freeman is the starter, who should be the backup? I actually think there is a conversation to be had there. Christian Walker is the leading WAR guy, most home runs, 17 home runs, 51 RBIs. Lamont Wade has the great batting average. He has a 1.9 F4 in a smaller amount of games, so you can make a case there. Maybe he's the Giants all-star. And then there's Pete Alonso, who typically gets some of these tiebreakers as a guy you want in the game for his star power, but definitely not the best season so far for Pete.
One day after Bryce Harper was selected as the leading vote getter and the starting first baseman for the National League, I'm going to say that Christian Walker will be starting for the National League
Wow.
down in Arlington in the 2024 MLB All-Star game. The manager of the National League is not Dave Roberts.
Oh, wow.
So therefore, Torey Lovullo going to give props to his boy going out. He's going to be a free agent after this year. Does this curry a little bit of favor? Bottom line is Christian Walker is one of the more underrated players in the game, certainly the most underrated first baseman in the game. And so if Torey Lovullo is making that decision, Freddie, you're great. You're fantastic. But the numbers are actually pointing to our guy, the entire right side of the infield, Arizona Diamondbacks, and rightfully so.
That is a fantastic point and a brilliant segue. So I give all the props to you on that. Yeah, maybe Christian Walker will be the starter, and Ketel Marte absolutely should be the second baseman because the finalists, it's Marte and Luis Ariz, who's not really even playing second base anymore, is a first baseman for the Padres. So yeah, Marte to me is as slam dunk as any of these. He's got to be the starter. He's a fringe MVP candidate right now. He's been unbelievable this year.
And Luis Ariz, he has two fan bases rooting for him. So you know what? If you can't get more votes after phase 2 than Ketel Marte in a smaller market like Phoenix, you don't deserve to start. So yeah, I think Ketel Marte will win that vote out, which I think starts up here in a couple days, goes on for a week before they make the announcement, in a little more than a week. Man, I've got All-Star Game fever. This is exciting.
So with that All-Star Game fever, who do you want to be that second baseman? Because I could almost make a case. It's crazy to say it, but to not even have a backup second baseman. Like can you just have shortstops? Because there are so many shortstops you want to put in there. Also, at third base, you got Joey Ortiz, who could also play second. So are they obligated, first of all, to have two second basemen on the roster? And if so, who is that other second baseman?
Yeah, that's a good question. It could be a numbers thing when we get down to it for a team that might need a representative. For the Rockies, they don't really have a second baseman right now that's in that conversation. Ryan McMahon used to play a lot of second base when Nolan Arenado was there. So the Rockies have a lot of taller second basemen in their lineage. First DJ LeMahieu, more recently, again with Ryan McMahon. So he could be that guy where he gets voted in or selected by Torey Lovullo in the National League as a third baseman, but he slides over to second base and has a little fun there. So you certainly can get creative. It's not totally out of the realm of possibilities that Luis Ariz doesn't make the All-Star game as the backup second baseman. He's really the second best candidate. So if you do need to squeeze in a player, you could do something creative like that. That's a good call, Ryan.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I look at third base and I think Alec Boehm obviously should win this vote between him and Machado. He's the better player. I don't think there's any debate about that. We'll see what happens. Maybe Mania's got a lot of support, but assuming that Boehm's going to get in as the Philly, beyond that, I think the debate was between him or Joey Ortiz is most deserving. So Ortiz should be an all-star, but like you mentioned, McMahon should be the representative for the Rockies potentially. So that's where you have to juggle it. And I think it then leads us to shortstop as well, because the question is, I ask you as a Rockies guy, who deserves it? If it's only going to be one, McMahon or Ezekiel Tovar?
That's really close. That's somewhat of a heated debate. One of the few heated debates centered around the Rockies right now. I think some of the conversation, of course, is, what players they will trade or who they should trade. Ryan McMahon being in that conversation. But man, that's a tough choice. You're really putting me on the spot for that, because I was really hoping for the next week to kind of make up my mind. I do really lean towards Ezekiel Tovar, but Ryan McMahon has been there every single year. He's always been in that conversation. The last 3 years running, has been a finalist for the Gold Glove Award at third base, has been the player that the organization has wanted to step up and be that next guy. And I think he's fallen a little bit short. And while his numbers aren't overwhelming right now, they definitely are the best on this team. And he's very much helped keep them afloat. You go back to the home opener, a walk-off grand slam, only the third in franchise history, along with Ryan Spilborghs and Charlie Blackmon. So you know what? I'm very much okay with Tovar maybe having to wait one more year. Maybe he does get in. Maybe he does sneak in as the final shortstop. But if there can only be one for the Rockies, I think Ryan McMahon is more than deserving this year.
Last year, you look at the American League, there was like 9 outfielders. So they really can change up the parameters. Shortstop this year, we had an amazing article that just went up looking at the candidates who could replace Mookie Betts. And obviously, there is a chance now in phase 2 of the voting, with Trey Turner being healthy and Phillies fans showing out the way they have, then maybe Trey Turner gets voted in and that's a moot point. But let's assume that Betts still gets the nod. And I would actually encourage, if you are a fan of another NL All-Star potential shortstop, like both of our teams, the Mets and the Rockies, you should be voting for Betts. So Turner maybe gets put off to the side because Trey Turner has missed about half the season. Now, granted, last I checked, he's hitting like 340. So if he ends up being an All-Star, it's not a horrible representation of the best in the league, but I like to see the guys that have been doing it for their team day in and day out in the first half, particularly for good teams, get rewarded. So that leads us to shortstop, where you have Elly De La Cruz, Francisco Lindor, Willy Adames, CJ Abrams, and Ezekiel Tovar. That's 5 shortstops that you can make an argument for that could be worthy of being in the All-Star game or even starting in the All-Star game. Let's begin with starting in the All-Star game. Who do you have, Patrick?
Well, I'm going to have to play a little bit of chess here and go with the thing that you've posited. Mookie Betts wins the voting.
Yeah.
And then Torey Lovullo has to pick a shortstop. And the guy that's probably the best candidate as far as who we feel the most confident, or at least who I feel the most confident in being an All-Star, you can make a case for any 6 of those guys. Read that article over on justbaseball.com. But I think Elly De La Cruz of the Cincinnati Reds will be the starting shortstop down at Globe Life Field because, again, MLB wants him there at the game in some capacity. They'll find a spot for him. I think Francisco Lindor is probably right up there with him. Same thing as Willy Adames. But could one of those guys end up getting snubbed? Could one of them still end up going if there's an injury of some sort outside of Betts? Sure. But the one guy I think we know that's going to be there this summer is going to be Elly De La Cruz. And for that reason, I think he's going to end up starting the game.
I think so as well. We did our polling for our staff on who should start in the All-Star game. I voted Elly De La Cruz because I look at the American League side of it, and you want a shortstop that can get close to matching. Now, Gunnar Henderson and Bobby Witt are clearly the best 2 shortstops in baseball this year. That's a battle we'll get to coming down the line here in a second. We go to the American League side. But I think Elly De La Cruz is the one young shortstop that you could put on the other side of that building and say, oh, yeah, that is the next wave. And I feel like Major League Baseball should capitalize on that. To make the case for Francisco Lindor, if you go and you throw away the first 2 weeks of the season, there has not been a better shortstop in baseball. And if the Mets stay hot leading into the All-Star break and they are maybe sitting in that playoff position, Francisco Lindor, if you had to ask me who's going to finish the season as the most valuable shortstop, I would say it's Francisco Lindor. And last year, he got snubbed. They put in Geraldo Perdomo, and Lindor had better stats. And by the end of the year, who was the best shortstop in the National League? It was Lindor. So while I believe Lindor deserves it, I think Elly De La Cruz will start.
Look, I got to defend my guy, Jerry P. Who was the shortstop in the World Series for the National League? Not Frankie Lindor, not Mr. Smile. It was Jerry P, Geraldo Perdomo. So you know what? That's a little bit of love for all the Diamondbacks folks that I do support down there in the Valley. But you're right. Yeah, I think any number of those guys, and even still, even if the Mets fall off just a little bit here in the next coming weeks, I think that very much in the month before the All-Star game, which we are in that period right now. One of the biggest stories is the Mets, is Grimace, and is Francisco Lindor, as you said, that closed door meeting with players only that really helped turn their season around. We don't know what's going to happen over the course of the next month heading into the trade deadline, but the Mets are very much relevant right now. They're very much in that wild card hunt, and Francisco Lindor is a big part of that. There's also numbers there to support it too. So all of those things put together, throw it in a bowl, mix it up. That makes a delicious dish that says, yeah, Francisco Lindor, he's an all-star.
I hope he is, because the Mets might only get one representative. I don't know if they'll get multiple. I think we're going to talk about Nimmo in a second here as a potential guy. And then Luis Severino has a fringe of a case, but I don't think that he necessarily should be in the All-Star game. So Lindor, to me, from watching this team every day, is the best player. And it's crazy that he has not been an All-Star in a Mets uniform, despite having 2 6-win seasons. So it's almost like your Bryce Harper thing. And who knows? Maybe the Mets are the Phillies 3 years from now. And it's like, oh, wow, Lindor's only been an all-star that one time, but to me, I think he should get the nod. And beyond that, I think Willy Adames deserves it as well. I think there should be at least 3, if not 4 shortstops if Turner gets in that make it. But also there's the case for Tovar that we've kind of mentioned. And then there's CJ Abrams, which leads me into the outfield. I actually want to talk about the starters next. Who's the all-star for the Nationals? Is it Jesse Winker or is it CJ Abrams? Or is it a pitcher?
or pitcher, yes. Oh gosh, Kyle Finnegan. Like, I mean, maybe that's good. Maybe you can get a couple of advertisements in between pitches. The guy who was on the mound for the first and only ever clock off, for anyone that doesn't follow Nationals and Rockies baseball. Yeah, Rockies won a game on a pitch clock violation because of Kyle Finnegan, their closer, who in the last 2 years has 16 pitch clock violations, tied with Craig Kimbrell for most in all of MLB. So doesn't pitch that much, right? He's only pitching 1 inning at a time every other day or so, and yet has the most in all of baseball. So he could be a candidate with his, sub-2 ERA. There's a chance of that. But again, if you're talking about some of the most exciting players in baseball, and if you're asking Dave Martinez, who do you think should go to the All-Star game, you'd have to tend to think that he's going to go with his young shortstop and CJ Abrams. Jesse Winker might not be around, very long before the July 30 trade deadline. Same thing with a Kyle Finnegan, right? So if you want to avoid that kind of complication of having an all-star and then immediately turning around and trading them, which I think some teams have an issue with doing. I know the Rockies did last year with Elias Diaz, who unfortunately for them, what's unfortunate is they got painted into a corner. Now they sort of couldn't trade the NL MVP, the All-Star game MVP, despite him having the most trade value in their entire roster. So the Nationals maybe want to avoid that with Winker and Finnegan. So you got to find a way to get someone like CJ Abrams in there, which is probably how someone like Ezekiel Tovar gets squeezed out.
You know what? What they should do is they should have CJ Abrams be the backup second baseman for the All-Star game. And then when he goes back to the Nationals, they should just keep him there because he has not played the best shortstop. I think maybe he should move over to second base. I don't know. But Abrams, look, if you're trying to say who is the marketable face of the Nationals that has played up to an all-star level, I think it's him. I honestly think that Jesse Winker, based on if you want to put together the best roster for the National League, I almost think sliding Winker in there makes a little more sense because if you have to carry 5 or 6 outfielders, there's not a ton of outfielders in the National League. Another article we just had that went up today, changing of the guard in the National League. We've talked about on this show too. Soto, moving leagues, Mookie Betts coming into the infield, being hurt, Acuna getting hurt. A lot of these outfielders have cleared out. Jurickson Profar has kept it up through the All-Star break, which is amazing. So he's going to get voted in. He deserves it. Unbelievable year. Christian Yelich seems to be an all-star starter. Fernando Tatis maybe was going to get voted in. Maybe he still does. He's not going to play in that game. He's hurt. So you look at maybe Teoscar Hernandez is the fill-in as the starter for the NL. Is that's sort of what you think the starting outfield is going to be? Is it going to be Profar, Yelich, and Teoscar?
For sure. I think Profar, despite, leading the National League outfielders in votes, I think he might have even been had the third most amount of votes in the entire National League. I think there's a chance maybe, again, this is part of the new system that MLB has for the All-Star game, where they throw out all of those votes from phase 1 and phase 2. And so now they're going into the finalists, and everyone starts from zero. So here's where, the Phillies could pool those votes and maybe get either a Marsh or Castellanos in there. But I think it's definitely going to be Hernandez, Yelich. And I think there's a good chance that despite the fact that Tatis Jr. is hurt, I think he'll still get the votes. So then again, it comes to Torey Lovullo to decide who is going to then take Tatis Jr.'s spot should he not start, which that's how it's looking. So it increases that debate because, the NL outfield is incredibly weak this year.
It is, and that's why I don't think you should really be forcing too many of them onto the roster. Like I said, you might need 6, but not more than that. Man, if Castellanos gets voted in, or Marsh, these guys, not to just be the Mets hater on the Phillies, but they're not all-star caliber players this year. I know Marsh had a good year, but he's been hurt for a minute, and Castellanos is kind of having a bad year. So hopefully the voters do the right thing, and you see Tatis or Hernandez get in there on the vote. And then you have Winker as a candidate. Jazz Chisholm, I think, unless it's Tanner Scott, Jazz Chisholm is the Marlins All-Star, but it could just be Tanner Scott, in which case I'd make the argument that the reserve should be Jesse Winker, Brandon Nimmo, and Elliot Ramos, who slowed down a little bit, but I think he deserves to be an All-Star for the Giants with the way he's produced throughout this season so far.
Do you think Bryce Harper, despite the hamstring injury, is looking at the NL outfielders and looking who the final 6 finalists are, saying, I know I just got selected at first base, but can I play right field? Can I do that? And you know what? I'm actually going to place a phone call to the Dodgers and say, Shohei, come on, just throw a mid on. You can play left field, and we'll just have Profar in center. Let's make this interesting. The NL needs us. This is what NL players do, Shohei. I know you're used to the American League, but this is what we do in the National League. Pete Rose ran over Ray Fosse and totally ruined his career during an All-Star game. So the National League is a different form of baseball. Harper right, Ohtani left, Profar in center field. Who says no besides everyone? Who says no?
Probably all of the coaching and training staff for the Dodgers and the Phillies that don't care about the Midsummer Classic and want those guys healthy come October. I actually think the more interesting thing is if in September the Dodgers say, guess what? Shohei Ohtani's been throwing and we're going to stick him in right field, because imagine how much I still envision this world where Ohtani gives up pitching and he becomes like the greatest defensive right fielder we've ever seen. Because I just imagine the highlights that we would see with him showcasing that arm out there. That could make the Dodgers so scary. And that's a topic for another Who's Better. We'll save that for what? End of August, early September, when we get the news that he's clear to throw. Speaking of Ohtani, we have a whole MVP conversation that we're going to have with him later. So we'll save the DH. That's open and shut. He's the guy, and maybe Ozuna will be the guy on the bench for the National League. But let's move to.
They might need Ozuna to play outfield, because I'm racking my brain. I'm racking my brain going, who else can play the outfield? Thinking of all these infielders, and I'm like, literally no one can go to the outfield. Marcell Ozuna, you might need him out there.
AJ Preller might just tell us, listen, just carry all the shortstops and throw some of them in the outfield. They've done it before. It works. You might as well. We'll just see CJ Abrams at left. What's the big deal? It's the outfield is weak this year in the National League, to say the least.